a model of how the actual involvement of a private equity fund manager in the company's life may pan out. When considering the question of how a private equity fund manager manages their portfolio, so once the investment is made, there's usually a lot of discussion about that. And many private equity fund managers obviously claim to be active investors, and they'll play a role on the board and maybe get involved in other ways. And sometimes that's not entirely clear for people to understand. And so what I thought might be useful here is to provide a model of how the actual involvement of a private equity fund manager in the company's life may pan out. And the best way to think of it is to think of three models. So let's take the example of a private equity fund manager who has a portfolio in which he has a dozen companies, which might be typical that you might find in any fund, VC, mid-cap, or buyout fund. And so the fund manager has these 12 companies in his portfolio, and he's thinking, well, how am I going to go about getting involved to create value in my company now that I've made the investment? And one useful way to do that, and this is something I've helped fund managers do in a capacity as an expert consultant, is to build a kind of off-the-shelf three model system as a framework that you can think about, so that you have some idea on how to roll out your involvement with a portfolio company. And so in this case, we see that we could say, well, we've got a basic involvement, we've got a medium involvement, and we have a high involvement. So we might have one of our portfolio companies that we've made the investment, everything is going very smoothly. We can show up to board meetings once every 3 months and not much more beyond that. And so we might say, well, the circumstances of this investment are such that we can roll out a basic involvement model. On the other hand, we may have a company, an investment we've made, which has been a bit of a challenging investment. We know that, but we think it's worth doing anyway because there's a big payoff perhaps at the end of it. But we have to really get stuck in and get involved. And this is where the high involvement model would come in. And then other companies may be something in between the two, hence creating three potential models of involvement. And then in any portfolio, you should have a balance of those. Clearly, you don't want to have everything as a basic involvement because that may mean that these companies are not going to be the big payoff companies. So in a portfolio of 12 companies, you might have a couple of high involvement models. You might have 6 or 7 basic involvements and some with medium involvement. Then it will also depend on whether you're a buyout investor, a growth investor, or a venture investor. By their nature, venture investors may be more on the high involvement side, whereas a growth investor might be more medium. So we've got that also to consider. But let's look at the plan. So let's look at an example. These can all be customized by fund managers, but it gives you an idea of the framework. So the basic involvement model I show here, we've got attend meetings of the company board of directors, well that's absolute minimum, respond to a reasonable level of requests to company emails, so the company will send emails saying, could you help me find this, could you help me with that, do you have any ideas about that? And then have a quarterly meeting to sort of go into more depth and discuss strategy. And we could describe that as a basic involvement. So it's kind of going to board meetings and then 4 times a year having a kind of half a day meeting or day meeting, and then responding to emails. Then we've got the medium involvement. And so now we scale up our strategy meetings. So we have an in-depth meeting once a month. We attend occasional meetings with potential partners. So, potential employees they want to recruit, or suppliers or customers or finance providers or others. So we show up to meetings to give support, maybe to show the partner that we're behind the company. And then we get to high involvement, where we have, we might have the meetings twice a month. We go on a corporate retreat a couple of times a year, so we go away for the weekend and do a brainstorming session. And then maybe we second one of our juniors to the company, or they go there once a week, 1 day a week, to help out with a project. So we sort of step up our involvement. So we can go from basic to medium to high. And what is very useful and important for some fund managers would be to sort of develop a template of their own basic, medium and high involvement model ahead of the fund, so that they have something they can fall back on and they've got a framework for thinking about it. Because you often see too many fund managers who say, well, we've made this investment, okay, well, let's figure out what we do next. And that's not a good place to be, because a lot of the value created in private equity comes from good management of the portfolio, and this framework can be a useful step towards achieving that.